So unfortunately, more often than not, we're looking, this is the view out my office window. And unfortunately, this is what I look out at a lot of times. It's hard to actually go out and breathe deeply while you're looking at this type of stuff. Here's one that I took from Lake Tahoe. And here's a quick video at our home. This was taken just about 3 or 4 days ago. And if you're thinking to yourself, well, you know, these could be just left by some sort of a commercial airliner. Well, my question would be to you, who left this next one that I'll show you after this? Apparently, the commercial airliner made a mistake direction they were going and came back or something. Anyway, so I'll stop sharing and come back. And I really want to dive into the whole chemtrail topic with you, Elana. And this is the point at which I want to show this book, Chemtrails, HAARP, and the Full Spectrum Dominance of Planet Earth. This was Elana's first book on this topic. So I'm just going to invite you to, maybe for the next 15 minutes or so, just share whatever you want to familiarize people with this topic, because these clips will go out to the general public as well as our subscribers. And I know, because I've been to your slideshows, I know you've got some illustrations. If you want to at some point use that to illustrate it, just do what you want to as succinctly as you can. Give an overview of this topic from your perspective.
Great idea to use a bit of the of my slideshow so that people can see what it's coming from. Okay, so let's just start with this. I mean, in a way, this is the 15 minutes. Is that? But I will talk about particularly Chemtrails, HAARP, the book, where truthfully I was pretty much a beginner, and I stuck very close to the documents. And Clifford was available by phone to guide me through certain things. And I had read Nick Begich's 1995 book, Angels Don't Play This Harp, HAARP. And so I knew some things, but—
Elana, I'm sorry to interrupt, but if you go up to your upper right-hand corner in your screen and click that highlighted button that says Format, yeah, click on that and it'll make your text go. Yeah, you were right there. Go back to your right. And where it says, yeah, keep going right there. Click on Format.
Okay, it says Apps at this point. I go in there and go Format. More. Oh, wait, Format.
Yeah, if you click on Format, it should just widen your screen so people can see it a little more clearly.
Yeah, but I don't see the word Format.
Oh, I'm seeing it on your screen.
You are?
Yeah.
On my, up here? I'm so sorry.
Right there. To right your here? Left. Go one more to your left.
Yeah, I see it. This was covering it, all the pictures.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you for the course on how to do this computer. All right. So I spent most of my time in the book explaining weather. And I was very much concentrating on the very first geoengineering operation. And this list, by the way, has been tweaked by me, admittedly. But this is Clifford Carnicom's list that he had back in 2005 for his aerosol crimes film, which is still good, still relevant, and is on the net for free. So I spent a lot of time on the weather. And at that time, that would have been before 2014, maybe from 2011 to 2014. What was going on was what I call, well, and what the newspapers and media called extreme weather. There were a lot of experiments going on by the geoengineers. Now, I wasn't using the term geoengineering much then either. I was using the US Air Force Academy's term chemtrails, which is straight from their their chemistry manual for to-be pilots. And then, as you know, it's been turned into sort of a conspiracy word now. Very interesting how the mainstream media that's completely a mockingbird CIA-controlled media gave it a little twist, a little spin, and it ends up being a conspiracy theory, which also is a CIA term from when John Kennedy was killed and people began to inquire as to the role of the CIA in the assassination. So, it all, what goes around comes around. It all comes back. I also spent time going through Bernard Eastland's patent for HAARP, which he did several, but the 1987 one, I sort of deconstruct it in one chapter in order to show some very interesting correlations with the work of Dr. Robert Becker, who was a real doctor, and he's written a couple of great books on just exactly what being a resonant being means. Is that certainly human beings are very resonant. We tend to resonate with what's around us, what's being pulsed around us. And so he points out a thing called cyclotron resonance. So I spent quite a bit of time on that in the chapter of deconstruction. The other thing that's unusual about the book, besides the extreme weather, and let me just name a few things, that would be Hurricane Sandy in New York, with the various things going on around it, Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, Fukushima in Japan. I go into all of these and indicate that HAARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project up in Kokona, Alaska, a tremendously powerful ionospheric heater, was involved in all that. So I attempt to prove that in the book. The final chapter is about Morgellons and Clifford Carnicom's work on it. Now, at that time, another term that I did not have yet and was not using was nanotechnology. I don't even know if I knew much about it. I knew I maybe ran into a few accounts of nanotechnology being in the jet fuel, JP8 up in the commercial jets. Maybe I ran into it also regarding some of the barium, strontium, aluminum, all of the different heavy metals being dumped from on high in the stratosphere. And those would have had to do with nanotechnology, all very, very tiny. A nano is 1/1,000,000th of a meter. Very, very important. Cannot stress enough that we have been under and are still under a nanotechnology revolution that, of course, our media has not informed us of or tried to prepare us for. So that's the first book, where it's really about weather, and it's also, to my knowledge, the only place that Clifford Carnicom's work is gone into in detail that is now in publication. This is a tragedy beyond belief that for 20, 25 years, this scientist who used to work for the Department of Defense, worked for Bureau of Land Management, quit those, went off on his own because he didn't quite like their philosophy, and that he has been ignored and marginalized by those very powers. And I think I've mentioned very often, but it's worth mentioning again, that when I got to know Clifford in Santa Fe, where I was also living, he pointed out that in the early days of his research into the condensation that he was collecting in northern New Mexico after the jets would fly, the HEPA filter detritus that he would scrape out and put under the microscope, that during those days he noticed on his computer that, and he had a software which availed him of this, he noticed that about, I think the list is 125 alphabet agencies from Washington, D.C. and probably Colorado Springs were all hitting his website to see what he was coming up with on his own, as they completely ignored all his appeals. And he sent many, along with experiments that he wanted replicated, to the EPA, the CDC, the Food and Drug Administration, et cetera. So this is our government. And that's when I began to wonder if this was a classified project, this geoengineering. And to my satisfaction, that was proven by the fact that this was happening to Clifford. He was ignored, and yet they were hitting his site, and that I was finding that I could not get the formula for the JP8 fuel. I tried commercial airline organizations, I tried military sites, and I was meanwhile trying to be a little bit sotto voce. I didn't know that I really wanted them to know that I was digging deep into this topic. Nope, couldn't get it classified. The fuel formula is classified. So I was pretty convinced. Then, of course, I saw that Raytheon initially owned all the patents for HARP, and along with the CIA. In fact, I would say that Raytheon and Lockheed Martin are synonyms for the CIA. So finding that the most massive, questionable intelligence agency of the United States was involved with these technologies that had to do with environment, climate change, global warming was a little odd. And I then accepted that I was in classified territory, despite the fact that I could go on the net and find many, many patents, many papers, lots of PowerPoint presentations at conferences, military conferences, NASA conferences, NOAA conferences, et cetera. If you scatter something widely enough, sort of like the myth of Isis and Osiris, where the body of Osiris, after his brother kills him, is spread out throughout the Nile Delta. And Isis, his sister wife, then goes and looks for all these things. It's sort of similar on the internet. A lot is there in open source, but you have to know what you're looking for. And when you find it, the most important thing is you have to know how to contextualize it. And as Foster said earlier, this is the strength of my mind. I've seen it for many years. I have the kind of mind that is so wrapped and enamored of knowledge that and observation of life. I've always wanted to be a great writer since I was a little girl. People would ask me, and what do you want to be when you grow up? And I would say, I'm going to be a teacher and a writer. I'm one of those people that knew from the very beginning. So for me, I can collect a lot of data, let it sort of percolate, let it sit, see a few things that make me think of something else, write that down in my notes, and then sort of wait for it to coalesce into a few thoughts. And that seems to be how it works, is for thinking anyway. And I don't know if people know this, but I'm a student of Rudolf Steiner. I learned a lot about thinking from Rudolf Steiner. Thinking is a very special kind of spiritual activity, according to him. And it really sort of arises. And only later, when I was reading some of the brain research that the military is pursuing, did I realize, oh, of course, thinking is not produced by the brain. They didn't think so either. It is a quantum activity. It is from quantum dimensions. And so to me, to lay out these books so that people could use a beginner's would be the Chemtrails HARP. And then to go to the second book, because the second book was born out of the first, to take what I had learned about weather engineering and chemical and electromagnetic engineering that is now taking place, and has for almost 3 decades in our atmosphere, I was able to then go one by one through Clifford's list of operations and see what has been done with them over the years. Each book goes a little deeper into the rabbit hole or into the sky, you might have to say, in order to see how once the atmosphere was ionized, and this is what I go into in the very first book of the role that HAARP played. And by the time it was published, HAARP had shut down for a time. And the Air Force had admitted that HAARP was completely successful in its experimentation to control the ionosphere. Control over the ionosphere leads to all 3 books, because without that control, you cannot keep the chemical and electromagnetic and nanotech composition of the atmosphere so that you can have plasma clouds, which is what we have now. These are not moisture clouds, I assure you. Especially the cirrus cloud cover is completely made of plasma, which is the 4th state of matter. And you can see how a whole raft of experiments were sort of loosed after HAARP was successful. And the geoengineering then needed a cover story because a lot of experimentation was going to be done over the next decades. And I have a list right here of all of the experimentation that is still going on from the stratosphere down. And really, if we continue to just think of the weather engineering, which is large enough, I understand that. Everybody talks about the weather. Everybody wonders about the weather. Many generals in many wars, like what's going on over in Ukraine, I'm sure they have the weather on their minds. The fact that control over the ionosphere has given full power over weather engineering around the globe is very hard for people to accept from me. And yet I do maintain that it's one atmosphere. All the weather is now controlled. Does that mean that there is no natural weather ever? Well, if there is natural weather, which arises usually in the South Pacific, then it is going to be allowed to be natural. But my guess is nothing is allowed anymore. It is all tweaked and used for experimentation. So I think I went a little outside your boundaries.
No,
Foster.
That's fine. So let me just highlight you mentioned the second book. So why don't you pause your share for a moment and let me tell people what this second book is. So this is the Under an Ionized Sky, from Chemtrails to Space Fence Lockdown. So we're going to get into that in just a moment. But particularly while people on the open platforms are still here, some people who aren't familiar with this topic may be going, oh, wow, there's a couple of real loonies on the internet talking about as if humans were controlling the weather or the atmosphere or something like that. So let me give you some frame of reference here, because they've been doing this. Clifford Carnicom has demonstrated it literally since the late 90s. So over probably 25 years, they've been doing it. So now that they've not only had to develop this cover story that Elana, it's for global warming but they've been doing it so long that they're now getting busted on it. So they need to come up with the authorization to keep doing it as if they hadn't been doing it all along. So let me share my screen again with you for just a second, and I'll show you a chilling video of John Brennan, who is the disgraced former CIA director who's been caught lying multiple times to Congress about Russiagate and a bunch of other things. But in this particular one, he's talking to the to the Council on Foreign Relations about his excitement about the potential of geoengineering. And you can see in this film, check, the warmth of his eye contact with the audience. You can get a sense what a sociopath looks like when he's actually delivering the lies. Look at this.
Another example is the array of technologies, often referred to collectively as geoengineering, that potentially could help reverse the warming effects of global climate change. One that has gained my personal attention is stratospheric aerosol injection, or SAI, a method of seeding the stratosphere with particles that can help reflect the sun's heat in much the same way that volcanic eruptions do. An SAI program could limit global temperature increases, reducing some risks associated with higher temperatures and providing the world economy additional time to transition from fossil fuels. This process is also relatively inexpensive. The National Research Council estimates that a fully deployed SAI program would cost about $10 billion yearly. As promising as it may be, moving forward on SAI would also raise a number of challenges for our government and for the international community. On the technical side, greenhouse gas emission reductions would still have to accompany SAI to address other climate change effects, such as ocean acidification, because SAI alone would not remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. On the geopolitical side, the technology's potential to alter weather patterns and benefit certain regions of the world at the expense of other regions could trigger sharp opposition by some nations. Others might seize on SAI's benefits and back away from their commitment to carbon dioxide reductions. And as with other breakthrough technologies, global norms and standards are lacking to guide the deployment and implementation of SAI and other geoengineering initiatives. Now, I could go on and on and on and on about the things that fascinate me, but rather than talk about them, I thought I'd stop here.
Okay, and let me show you one more here, because in their effort to get permission to do this,
when you look at
they've
this,
been trying to
what do you see?
To
me, this is one of the most beautiful, fascinating, and frustrating things I've ever seen. That's because I'm a mathematician.
There's a Harvard scientist named David Keith, who's been one of the main geoengineers all along. And so he got a mainstream appearance on late night, with Stephen Colbert, so he could get a chance to sell this. And this has become a classic.
You could
clip.
actually spray sulfuric acid in the stratosphere 20 kilometers over our head.
And one more time.
You could actually spray sulfuric acid in the stratosphere 20 kilometers over our head and use that to stop the planet warming up in a ugly tech fix.
You can spray something into the atmosphere to change.
Spray pollution into the atmosphere to stop it warming.
How do you do this?
You'd start with a fleet of modified business jets and say 20,000 tons of sulfuric acid into the stratosphere every year. And each year you have to put a little more. And this doesn't, in the long run, mean that you can forget about cutting emissions. We will need to rein in emissions.
We'll get to it eventually. But in the meantime, we're shrouding the earth in sulfuric acid.
So people are terrified about talking about this because they're scared that it will prevent us cutting emissions.
Right, and also that it's sulfuric acid.
We put 50 million tons of sulfuric acid in the air now as pollution, and it kills 1 million people a year worldwide.
Okay, but it'll be better if we put more in.
We're talking about 1% of that.
1% more, we're just killing 10,000 more people.
You can do math.
What happens to the sulfuric acid after it's sprayed? Does it just stay up there?
No, it rains down, but it's a tiny addition to what we're already doing.
Is there any possible way this could come back to bite us in the end?
It actually turns out to be an old idea. This was known since President Johnson.
You ever look at those planes up there? They have contrails behind them. Maybe all those planes with the contrails, maybe they're actually spraying chemicals into the atmosphere right now and Uncle Sam isn't telling us.
It seems extremely unlikely.
That the United States is not telling something to its citizens? That seems extremely likely to me. Read the newspaper. I think they might have your idea already.
Okay.
That's terrific.
So that gives you a little bit of a sense of how they're actually trying to bring this out into the mainstream now. We're going to dive into the next of these topics. But before we do, we've run into the time where we need to close down the public platforms now and invite anybody who's watching on those free platforms to come to the Freedom Portal, where you can sign up very quickly for a free membership trial and then come right back into this conversation, because we're going to be diving into the EMF and the ionization. We're going to be going into transhumanism, and then we're going to be going into who's doing this and why are they doing this, and how can we actually stop this and turn it around. So obviously it's a critical conversation. And if you're not already a member of the Freedom Portal, we would love to have you get into these deep conversations with us and to continue with this one. So Leandro, if you could come back on and just let people know the steps to take to come over to that if they're interested, then we'll dive back in.
Absolutely. I'll go ahead and share my screen so I can walk you guys through this process. All right, so basically you're just going to go over to thriveon.com, and we'll be dropping links in the chat as well, so you can go straight there. And basically you're going to click to start your free 7-day trial. And once you get to this page, you'll have the ability to select between the different account levels, whether you want to be an explorer or an angel, and whether you want to be monthly or annual. And once you make that decision, you can go ahead and click Start My Trial. Okay, then it's going to take you to a thank you page, and you can go ahead and click to return to the Freedom Portal catalog. And then once you get there, you're going to click on the sign in to continue link on that big thumbnail right there. Don't click get access now, because you've already signed up and logged in with your credentials. So you're going to go ahead and sign in there, enter the credentials you just set up. And then once you get back to the event page, you can click attend next to today's event. Then it'll take you to the next page, and you can click join webinar down there at the bottom. And that'll bring you into the Zoom with us, so you can participate in the live chat with our core Freedom Portal community and continue this enlightening and exciting conversation.
All right. Thanks a lot, Leandro.
Absolutely.
We hope that you will join us, and let's keep going now. Where would you want to go next? We've touched on the ionization, and I want to get into the third book also on the transhumanism. But where makes sense for you, Elana, to go next in this story?
Well, let's go back to my magic list,
Okay.
which really helps to visualize that the geoengineering that David